Good morning, everybody. It's Tuesday, the 18th of January. The month is flying by, and we are starting off our discussion this morning. This is the Senate Transportation Committee, and we're starting off with new electric vehicle incentive program. And I think we have Dave Roberts and Patrick Murphy. And so whoever would like to lead off first, go right ahead.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Good morning. Good morning, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Patrick Murphy, and I work at VTrans as the Sustainability and Innovations Project Manager. As you mentioned, I'm also joined here by Dave Roberts, who is a Senior Consultant at VEIC and Coordinator at Drive Electric Vermont, and certainly a key partner of ours in transportation electrification efforts. As always, if you or any members of the committee have questions, feel free to jump in and ask, but I do have a few slides here to share this morning. Can everyone see this okay?
Yes, I think, yeah.
Great. So I just wanted to begin with a quick summary of the program. Vermont's incentive program for new plug-in electric vehicles has now been open to residents with low to moderate incomes for a full 2 years. It was initiated, as you know, in December of 2019 with $1.1 million. And has to date been effectively managed with the support and partnership of Drive Electric Vermont, and then also no-cost contracts with all of the state's distribution utilities, and then of course our local dealerships. And in last year's transportation bill, Act 55, $3 million in new funding was authorized, with up to $300,000 of that available for program administration. And so just over half of the $2.7 million for incentives has been committed since then. And so despite challenges that we're seeing with this market, we seem to be on track to fully obligate this funding by the end of state fiscal year 2022.
You'll probably go into it, but what is the incentive for vehicles? I mean, is it different price range of vehicles or different rebates or?
Sure. So the incentives are different for both. They're deeper for both all electric vehicles. So you have a higher incentive for all electric vehicles versus the plug-in hybrids, and then they're also higher for the lower income bracket. So for this program, there's two income brackets that have been established, and one is lower income, so for an individual less than $50,000, or for a couple less than $75,000, and then for the higher income bracket, it's a max of $125,000 for a household.
How much is the incentive for those brackets?
So the maximum incentive is for $4,000.
It doesn't make a difference what the cost of the vehicle is?
Well, so there's also a price cap, not a price cap, I should say, but a cap on the base level of the manufacturer's suggested retail price. So that's $40,000, which means that essentially you could have a vehicle whose base model costs $39,900, but the overall price might be, $42,000, $3,000. And so, but the specific incentive amounts are prescribed by whether you fall into one of two income brackets, and then whether it's an all electric vehicle or whether it's a plug-in hybrid. So this gives a view of the historical monthly incentive spending for new plug-in electric vehicles. And I would just note a couple of key points on this chart. The first would be, of course, in March of 2020, you can see, and then in April, the result of the onset of the pandemic. Later in that year, there's another big dip in October, and that's due to the program having run out of funding. This was there was 950,000 that was then added to it, and so it quickly recovered in November and into the early months of 2021. But then you also see a dip here in August and September of this year. And this is where we really begin to see the impacts of the global microchip shortage that I'm sure many of you have heard about. There was also at this time news of the Chevy Bolt recall, which has certainly hurt the electric vehicle market here in Vermont. Chevy Bolts have been a very popular incentive recipient, as you'll see, because of their decent range and affordability. And but the main driver here, I think, is definitely the microchip shortage, which has been significantly reducing supply of EVs here and elsewhere throughout the country, and has really impacted the used vehicle market as a result as well. For those who may not be aware, in short, the majority of the auto industry depends upon the supply of these microchips for their own manufacturing of their vehicles. And so the pandemic slowed production of these at first because of decreased demand for vehicles generally. And then later because of factories being shut down due to COVID. And then there's a significant kind of timeline in the production of these chips. And so we've seen considerable delays in this year, and it seems likely to continue throughout this coming year. I did want to note just that there are some reasons for optimism, at least in the long run. This past year has really seen unprecedented commitments or pronouncements by auto manufacturers to electrify what they're offering in terms of models, in whole or in part, by 2030 or 2035. There'll be new models coming on in this year, whether it's for Nissan or particularly models like the Ford F-150 Lightning that have applications beyond just your average sedan, which could provide Vermonters with new electric options that are really competitive with their gas counterparts. And then lastly, in the coming years, there'll be significantly more investment in our public charging network, as we spoke about last week, to give more and more residents the infrastructure and the confidence that comes with that, that they would need to switch to electric. And so as an example, you'll hear later on today about a pilot program that the legislature funded last year to deploy chargers at affordable multi-unit dwellings. These investments, they offer an opportunity for households with lower incomes to more easily participate in Vermont's incentive programs. And so it'll help to expand the pool of people that are able to purchase an all-electric vehicle in particular, or at the very least, to support the use of the cleaner and cheaper plug-in option for those that own a plug-in hybrid.
Someone asked me a question the other day, and it was a good question, but I said, how are they going to, if the incentives to go electric, which everyone has agreed with, how are we going to supply all this electricity nationwide? Isn't there going to be a tremendous demand? And how do we keep up with the demand that's going to be created for the companies? Is there some sort of plan in the works that's not going to raise the rates through the roof, or how is that going to work?
Sure, and that actually is the topic of not the next presentation, but
Okay.
the
All
one
right.
after that.
All right. Okay. We'll wait. Yeah.
Sure. So Philip Peacock from the Public Service Department, I think, can speak to those issues.
Right.
But I appreciate the question. So I did want to just note sort of how we're meeting our state goals. There are certainly Vermont's incentive program is fairly unique in how it's structured to benefit households with the lower incomes most. And so about 45% of the incentives have been issued to those who fall into the lower income bracket. But because those come with higher incentives, as we just spoke about, 60% of the total funding has supported purchases among this group. And this past year, a change was made to allow nonprofit car sharing operators to receive up to 5 incentives. Car Share Vermont took advantage of this change and purchased 2 new PDVs to locate them at public and affordable housing developments for use by residents who do not own vehicles and cannot maybe afford an electric vehicle, even with the substantial incentives that we have. And so it's also heartening to see that I think the incentive funding has mostly encouraged the purchase of all electric vehicles, over 60% here, maximizing the benefits to climate and local air quality. So this chart shows the incentives distributed by the most popular models, and gives you a sense of who's buying which kind of vehicle. And then when we talk about equity, we're also looking at geographic equity. So there's no doubt that electric vehicles have been better suited to some areas than others because of how, at least in the early stages of electric vehicle technology, there were limits around range, and those certainly still exist. And then we talked about infrastructure last week and how that influences purchasing decisions. And then there's just the availability of vehicles at in the state, but in local dealerships. And then lastly, I think some of what might be impacting how incentives are distributed throughout the state is the distribution utilities also have varying levels of their own vehicle incentives. So you might have one like Burlington Electric has incentives up to $2,400, but there might be a smaller incentive or no incentive elsewhere in the state. So I wanted to touch on a couple of things to consider with the program. You saw in the earlier chart the funding lapse and the impact that had in October of 2020. So it's, I think, really important to ensure the continuity of funding and provide predictability for program participants, whether it's both really the consumers and auto dealers, and being able to communicate the program to others, and just to support the goals around increasing the market share of electric vehicles. Because of supply issues with the Chevy Bolt production, and increases to the manufacturer's suggested retail price for a few models, we do have concerns about vehicle availability. The Chrysler Pacifica plug-in hybrid is one of the few models that can be made wheelchair accessible, which does raise, I think, issues of equity for who can participate within the program. And so just to give the committee a better sense of the possible impact of these price changes, I wanted to show this chart, which looks at the share of incentives in 2021. Sorry for that. And gives you a sense of how much does the Chevy Bolt account for in the last year? How much do these models on the margins, which have been included within the program, but will not be according to the current guidelines? The Volkswagen ID4, which is an all-wheel drive vehicle, the Tesla Model 3, and these others.
Do you think a price has a lot to do with it, because the Chevy Bolt is a lower price, so they get more people are buying them because of the incentive? Is that
that's certainly a factor that the Chevy Bolt has been a more affordable option. You can see a Toyota Prius Prime is also much more affordable for folks, and so those tend to be the more popular. So also figuring into this equation is the federal tax incentive, the federal tax credit. So on a Toyota Prius Prime, that number is $4,500 at the moment. Toyota is getting close to their cap, so that will probably go away at some point this year. The Nissan Leaf still has a maximum $7,500 tax credit available. And that all depends on what an individual's tax liability is. So you're not necessarily able to take full advantage of that if you have a lower tax liability for any given year.
Yes, go right ahead, Senator Persick.
Yeah, Patrick, I had a couple questions. So AOT is just looking at possibly raising the cap from $40,000. And like, what's your timeline on making a decision on that? You know?
Sure. There hasn't been a recommendation made yet. We're still looking at what impact it would have, and there may be, beyond these vehicles, there may be other vehicles that are released this year that are below or at or just above the cap. So that would probably factor into a recommendation as well.
So are you waiting? Because that's always going to happen, right? Every year there's going to be new cars. So I just wondered if you had a timeline for making that decision.
We don't have a timeline at this moment.
Okay. And do you think the base price of F-150 would impact that, the Lightning?
It at least in initial reports, it was expected that the F-150 would fall just below the $40,000 mark. So if they held to that, then if Ford held to that, then certainly it would qualify.
And has AOT made a decision? I guess we have to wait for the governor's budget today about recommendation, any more funding going into EV incentives? Or we
right. Well, I think that would be a part of the governor's recommendation this afternoon.
And maybe it's a question for Dave Roberts, but have the program, have you thought at all about combining the vehicle incentive with an incentive for a charger for those customers that don't live in GMP territory? Because I think it's really important that people have chargers at home. I'd say it's essential, and GMP will give them a free charger. And I'd like to see GMP work closer with the dealers on that. But I think it's a weak point in our rollout that we don't have a better way of making sure that anybody that's buying an electric car has a real at-home way of charging. So I wonder if you guys have thought about that at all.
We've certainly talked about that possibility. Dave, would you like to weigh in on that?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Dave Roberts. I'm the Drive Electric Vermont coordinator at VEIC. And, at this point, there are some other utilities, electric distribution utilities offering incentives for home charging, typically the level 2 240 volt charging option. So it's not limited to GMP, although GMP is the only one that's just providing sort of the free charging equipment on a widespread basis at this point. And I'm sure they'd be happy to come in and talk more about some of their efforts to work with dealers. But I do know that they have worked with dealers, and it is sort of part of, for the dealers that have signed on to pass through the GMP incentives at the point of sale, that usually the dealers will sort of complete the paperwork for the customer, and the customer will get the charging equipment sent to them in the mail, usually pretty quickly after a purchase. But it is still up to the customer to pay for the installation cost. So even though GMP is providing the equipment at no cost, customer still has to cover any installation fees. And, there are, for example, Chevrolet, if hopefully they will be selling bolts again in the near future, and they are offering a free installation with a bolt or bolt EUV purchase these days. So there's sort of a mix of different incentives depending on utility and automaker for charging. And at this point, we also know that some Vermonters are still relying on level 1 charging, which is just plugging into a standard home outlet. It's usually fine for plug-in hybrids in particular because they have smaller batteries and they can usually charge overnight just fine on level 1. It's for somebody getting an all-electric vehicle, level 2 charger is usually, it's certainly desirable and in some cases essential if people are driving longer distances. And we are just now getting ready to field a survey of incentive recipients. So folks who have taken advantage of the program to date, to ask them a number of questions about their experience with the program, but that will include some questions related to charging, because at this point we don't know exactly how, are people using level 2 charging? Are they using level 1? What's their experience been? So, we should have some better data to base future decisions on once that survey is fielded and the results are in, which hopefully we'll have that completed sometime this March. So the short answer is, because there are so many other players working on charging infrastructure, it hasn't been something that the state has really taken up for home charging, with the exception of the multifamily pilot that you'll be hearing about that Patrick mentioned, because there are more issues and it's more expensive generally to get multifamily charging installed, particularly at affordable housing.
What utilities are offering chargers other than GMP? BED?
BED has I think it's a $500 incentive. I'm just going to look on the drive.
It's on your website?
Yep.
Okay, that's fine.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah. BED is up to $500, I think, for both the charger and installation costs.
And Washington Electric is working with Efficiency Vermont on a power shift pilot program that is providing free level 2 charging equipment as well. And VEC has a bill credit of $250.
Okay.
So I'll just talk quickly about the program transition. So with the out of the $3 million that was appropriated last year for this program, $300,000 was made available for administrative costs, and to do things more efficiently. Utilities have been managing this with no-cost contracts, and while that was a creative and cost-effective solution, it's not really a sustainable one. And so we issued in the fall of this year a notice of funding opportunity to hire a third-party administrator to manage both the incentive program for new plug-in electric vehicles, but then also the other two newer programs that are in the process of being designed right now. So it's been a long process, but we're pleased to have selected this Center for Sustainable Energy, and pleased as well that VEIC will remain a part of that team, helping with issues around outreach, education, awareness, and being that connection to local stakeholders and communities in particular. Dave mentioned the work that Drive Electric Vermont is doing to evaluate the incentive programs. That is part of a grant agreement that was funded in part with $250,000 above and beyond the $3 million to engage in all kinds of activities to support vehicle electrification. And so in addition to evaluating this program, there's all kinds of other support, supporting things like the multi-unit dwelling grant program for charging there. They're supporting various businesses or entities, public entities that are looking to electrify their fleet, working on things like electric school bus deployment and what structure that might take within the state. So there are a number of different things that Drive Electric is working with VTrans on at the moment, and we hope to have more updates for you soon. One of those things is just the plan that we discussed last week, how the state will build out its electric vehicle charging network over the next 10 years, and that's expected to be updated every 3 years. So at this point, I just open things up to the committee for questions.
Questions, committee?
Senator Mazza raised a question about what this was going to cost and all of that. And I don't know if this is appropriate time, but we've all gotten it. Well, I shouldn't say we've all got an email, but an email was sent out to, I know Senator Kitchell got it. It looked like most of the chairs got it. I don't see Senator Mazza's on it. But it was sent out by all the major players in Vermont, and they're asking for $2.2 billion to upgrade the grid and all of that to in the anticipation of the electrical upgrades needed to take care of this electricity that we have coming. So I just wanted to put that out there, that that's an awful big number, and hopefully we do this right.
Any response from anyone, or they want to take it up at a later time?
I could
I
offer,
haven't,
Yes,
Yeah.
Senator Kitchell.
well, it may have been sent. I haven't had a chance. Are you talking about the comprehensive energy plan, Senator Ingalls?
Well, it's just a, it kind of looked like this. Can you see that? I can send it to you, Senator Kitchell. But it was sent out by Vermont Electric, Burlington Electric, BEPSA, Green Mountain Power, Washington Electric, and Velco. And it's a federal and state infrastructure funding request for a cleaner and greener Vermont. And it just goes on to say what they're, what's going to happen for them to supply all this power. One of them is $593 million to upgrade the power lines and stuff. Another one's $677 million to help Vermonters to be able to use this power. I mean, those are the two biggest ones. I mean, if you cut this thing in half, you're still talking about $1 billion that we need to figure out how we're gonna do all this stuff. So I think, you know, I'm working on getting some people in here to talk about that a little further. I think some of this was, the reason why this came to me was because I have been talking about it a little bit, but I think that we need to find a way to make sure that we're gonna be able to do all this stuff. There's a lot of money's coming. And I don't see any way that we're not gonna be able to do all this without substantial rate increases for everybody to pay for all this. But I suppose we can talk about it more. But I'm gonna download this and get it to all the committee members so they can see what I've seen. And so as we talk about this more, we'll all be talking about the same stuff.
You know, I must confess, I haven't seen it. Perhaps I haven't read all my emails. Some of that might be sort of positioning for, with the federal infrastructure, there's money for, I believe, grid improvement. So sometimes you articulate the need in the most compelling way, but absolutely, I think we need to understand the report or the request and the analysis. We have had a lot of discussion. Riley Allen, was it Riley Allen, Senator Perchlik, that had been in previously? Because this was an issue. This has been an ongoing issue that the committee has been following in terms of what demand this will create, the ability to meet that demand. And I think wasn't it Riley Allen who provided testimony about around this, and he's still there, right? Did he retire?
No, he got appointed by the governor to the Public Utility Commission.
Oh, okay, all right.
Moved up.
So he's in a different capacity then.
Right.
Okay.
We also heard testimony from TJ Poor last week on this because of the of the energy plan, where he showed us graph of the projections of the electricity that we would need, and that they had no concerns about that increase in electricity, because it's not all at one time. It's not going to increase the peaks, and there's things that we can do to monitor that. And maybe Phil from the department is going to talk about that later on, Philip Peacock. But yeah, looking forward to more discussions about them.
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, if we're at this time last year, if we're at about 4,300 electric vehicles, many of them that were just plug-in hybrids. We're now probably around 57 plug-in electric vehicles. And so there's definitely substantial capacity right now to be able to meet the demand. And this isn't going to, you know, the trajectory is going to be able to be phased in as other efforts are going on. And so I think Philip Peacock will be able to speak to these more specifically. And Dave, I think you had
Yes, thanks, Patrick. I was just going to offer to Senator Perchlik's earlier question about level 2 charging and incentives. One of the reasons the utilities are offering those incentives is because the equipment that they're incentivizing can be used to make sure the charging, or to encourage the charging, is happening during off-peak hours. So, which is really the critical thing for the state's transmission system, is to not add to the peak. And because most EVs are easily charged overnight, you know, theoretically, they shouldn't have a major impact on peaks as long as utilities continue to develop these programs and you know, encourage people. And rates are one of the ways that consumers can be encouraged, by offering lower rates for charging during those off-peak hours. So.
Thanks, Dave. Are there other questions at this point?
Any questions, any concerns? It's going to be an ongoing discussion, I can see, for many a long time to come, because there's so many moving parts. And I think it's now, how do we compare with other states? Are they all doing basically the same thing, or other states have different incentives? Everyone's different, or is it a national trend for $40,000 or whatever it is? Is that?
Yeah, every state is doing something different or not doing something at all. So we're very much sort of leading the way in terms of our emphasis on equity and making sure that the incentives are really, in fact, making that purchase decision come true. So because it's targeted to low and moderate income households, that is different than most other programs. And so it means that we're efficiently spending public resources. So the latest estimate that I've seen is about 5,700 vehicles as of January of this year, which I think would mean that over half of the vehicles that have been new registrations since the time this program has started have been incentivized through this program.
If I was a resident of, say, Massachusetts or New York, what would my incentive be over there?
Massachusetts has a lower incentive amount, so I think it's about $2,500 maybe.
On the same cap on 40,000?
And it's a different price cap, so
Okay.
it's 50,000.
Okay.
But that's based on sale price and not the base MSRP.
Oh, so if you bought a sticker on the car that was 50,000, you bought it for, say, 40,000, you would get the incentive, but it all depends what you pay for the car.
That's right. It's the final sale price in the car. And
In Vermont, if the car is $40,097, can the dealer say 40,000? Or they have to go with a 40,000?
no, it's based on the publicly listed
Price on the sticker?
MSRP. So,
Okay.
so that in fact has made it, I think, easier, and Dave can speak to this point, but I think it's made it easier to manage the program and make it clearer to participants up front, so that as long as it's publicly listed, this is the base MSRP, then you're able to purchase this vehicle. If you had like Massachusetts does, the sale price, it would become more complicated, because you could have a base MSRP, but what vehicles are actually selling at might be above that, or you could have add-ons like a tow hitch or whatever it might be that put you that increase the sale price above and beyond that. And so it would just become trickier to manage if you went that way.
Okay, if we don't have anything else, questions, we can move on to the bicycle. Is that next on the agenda?
That's right.
Okay, if the committee want to move on to that? Okay, let's do it.
Okay, so just wanted to give just again a program summary. This e-bike program was authorized last year with a small pot of funding, $50,000. One thing we just wanted to note is that there weren't any funds authorized for the administration of this program. And so that's one change that we might seek, is making a small amount of funding available to administer the program, 10% or something to that effect. But this is one of these programs that I mentioned that will be designed and managed by the new administrator, this Center for Sustainable Energy. And we are expecting that this would be launched at the same time as a transition from the current structure for the incentive program for new PEVs. And so you would have these two both launched at the same time, ideally in March of this year.
So when you talk about $200 incentive for bicycles, what does that mean? The bicycle can cost $1,000 or $1,200 or $2,000? What's the cutoff?
So there's no cap on the bicycle purchase price. It's just a straight incentive that was authorized by the legislature for $200.
What's electric bike cost? Any idea? I have no idea.
So you could you could purchase an electric bike for maybe $1,000, but there are many models that could cost many thousands of dollars. They're expensive. They're expensive bikes for sure.
Oh, okay.
Some electric utilities again offer through their tier 3 incentives, offer the $200 or $100 incentives on these bikes. BD, GMP, Stowe Electric, I believe. So this incentive will be able to be stacked on top of that to make it a bit more affordable, but
there's no cap on earnings. There's no cap on earnings one way or the other. It doesn't make any difference how much money you have. You still get $200.
It does make a difference. So this program uses the guidelines for the incentive program for new PEVs, and it essentially just says anybody that qualifies for either the low or moderate income brackets within that program would qualify for this incentive.
Those are the parameters that we included last year. Is that correct when we did our bill?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. I may not be the only one. I was looking at the Center for Sustainable Energy, and because I just want to make sure that this is a contract then for this organization. I guess it's based in Boston and works with government, and it's a nationwide. I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right, or is there a Vermont specific organization? You're talking about this entity that you're contracting with, and I just want to be clear, or I'd like a little more background about the entity that we're contracting with, because maybe I'm the only one who isn't familiar, and maybe I'm referencing the wrong center, but it says it contracts with local government, state government, and its mission is to decarbonize.
That's right. And so this will be a grant agreement with this organization. It's a national nonprofit that's based in California, but it manages multiple state incentive programs across the country. So they have a lot of experience with these kinds of programs, and then also with evaluation, with being able to look at the various program parameters and see how effective they're being, and then being able to make recommendations for modification if necessary.
So maybe they have a regional office. It says here that's Atlantic Avenue in Boston, but I don't know.
So I'm not sure, but I think they definitely work with the state of Massachusetts on their incentive program, both their vehicle incentive program and their electric vehicle charging program, and so that might be that I can't really speak to
Yeah, well, they
What
also help Oregon with their vehicle
Mhm.
rebate. So they obviously have experience working with state programs along these lines.
And so
Is this
they'll,
the first contract we've had, or has this entity been contracted, been doing other work in Vermont?
no, this is the first grant agreement that we'll have with the Center for Sustainable Energy, and part of why it took a bit longer to execute was just that they weren't registered in the state of Vermont with the Secretary of State. So this will be their first set of programs that are being managed by the state of Vermont, and it will be to help streamline a lot of the work that has been taken on by VTrans to this point, and by the distribution utilities, which have essentially made this be able to happen over the past several years.
Senator Kitchell, even though they might not have been registered in Vermont, but they have employees that live in Vermont, including some former EVT, VEIC employees that have kind of moved over there. They're similar to VIC in the kind of work that they do.
Okay.
And just to, sorry.
No, I was just saying we're throwing this around, and I just was trying to understand a bit more about this entity and, their expertise that would be brought to bear through the contract. So it's more background information in terms of this entity that would be working with the state toward as part of our efforts to reduce carbon emissions.
Right. And so they'll also be working with VEIC. VEIC will still help manage the outreach, make the connections on the ground to community organizations to help get more and more people participating. So that's where we saw their response is a strong one. Not only do they have experience in a number of other states, but they'll be working with a local partner who can help them, with the particularities of the state, and then also with the actual transition of the incentive program for new PEVs, which is going to be a really important coordination effort.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, well, thank you very much for the good overview this morning, and we'll continue our discussion at a later time.
Did we want to talk a bit more about the Replace Your Ride program, or?
Sure. You got
okay.
more to, yeah.
Yep. So this slide is just showing that the program, the electric bike program, will also have the two options similar to the incentive program for new PEVs, allowing a point of sale rebate. And then, there's an existing infrastructure, so to speak, because a number of utilities already have programs. There are local bike dealerships, local bike retailers that are working with utilities already on incentive programs. And so this would allow for a point of sale rebate, but also a consumer direct rebate where if there are cheaper options online, or there are issues with supply, which, the electric bike market is not immune from, then people will be able to also apply for the incentive after having purchased an e-bike online. For the Replace Your Ride program, last year, $1.5 million was authorized, $300,000 of which was made available for administrative costs. And the program was to encourage owners of older, higher polluting vehicles gas vehicles to switch to cleaner transportation options. For this program, eligible applicants must either meet the lower income threshold for the new PEV incentives or meet the criteria of the Mileage Smart program, which is 80% of state median income based on household size. And it's envisioned that up to $3,000 in incentives will be available to participants who retire these high polluting vehicles. And they'd be able to put this towards the purchase of either a new plug-in electric vehicle, a used vehicle through the Mileage Smart program. It could be bikes, electric bikes, bicycle equipment, fully electric motorcycle. And then there was this provision for all kinds of shared mobility services, which would reduce the need for vehicle ownership, which could be a bike sharing system, car sharing, but it could also be public transit if fare free doesn't extend into the next year. It could be bus and train travel, or Go Vermont has a van pooling option. So there are a number of different possibilities, which also make this a program more complex to design and implement. So it's imagined that this would be implemented within 1 to 2 months after the transition to a plug-in electric vehicles has been made, and it would be done in a phased approach, where initially you'll be able to apply for these incentives and stack them with the existing programs, either for new plug-in electric vehicles or for electric bikes. And then as that's rolled out, it'll be another month or so to develop this voucher system. And we've had, been working on exploring potential voucher platforms that would allow for verification with scrap yards that a gas engine has been disabled, and then be able to apply a voucher to any number of options, either one or some combination of the shared mobility options. And so that remains to be worked out with the administrator. But it does add a level of complexity. And so these incentives can be stacked with the plug-in electric vehicle program and Mileage Smart. So you could have, potentially up to $7,000 towards an electric vehicle, or even $8,000 towards a used electric vehicle. And as I said, we'll be working on developing this mobility voucher with the administrator. And for all of these programs, there will be data collected to help evaluate how we're doing, how we're meeting our goals, and whether there are opportunities to kind of tweak it to better meet our goals.
Just interesting to know that if we're doing it, other states aren't doing it. How is that going to help the whole climate in the United States in general? So it's just strange that it's not something that's going to be all over the place. And
there are certainly states that are working on programs like these, but the electric bike program, that might be the only, be the first statewide bike incentive program in the country. I know that California has authorized that program, but it won't be up and running till maybe next summer. And then
we're not competing with a gasoline bicycle. I mean, that's
right. And so, and Replace Your Ride is there are other examples of it, but it's more rare than the straightforward vehicle incentive programs that other states have. So Vermont is doing some things differently, and the hope is to learn from this and be able to figure out what programs are most effective and where to make the biggest gains, both in terms of supporting climate goals and making sure that vulnerable Vermonters are able to access this technology. So this gives just a anticipated timeline with work beginning here this month to transition the programs and design the new ones, hopefully with the launch in March of the e-bike program, and then later on in the spring, the Replace Your Ride program. Are there questions from the committee?
Okay, if there isn't any, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
And,
Thanks very much for your time.
okay, thank you. Jeannie, what is the future this morning? You said Philip has canceled.
Yeah, well, yeah, Mr. Peacock's off the schedule, but Michelle
Can Michelle move up now, 11?
Michelle has moved her 11:30 segment up to 11.
Okay,
But if you want to take a break,
well, you want to do that committee, or you want to get done earlier and because we have a busy noontime and afternoon? What do you want to do?
Let's roll.
Let's
roll.
keep going.
Let's go.
Good morning, folks.
Good
Hi,
morning.
Michelle.
Morning.
So I'm going to be joined this morning by Bronwyn Cook from the Department of Housing and Community Development. And I just texted her to let her know that you were rolling through. So looks like she's just jumping on now.
Hey, all right. Yep.
And so we're here this morning to talk about the electric vehicle supply equipment pilot program for multi-unit dwellings. So for like apartment houses, for duplexes, and that sort of thing. This is an area where it's been identified nationally that there's a shortfall because of the nature of multi-unit housing. These are oftentimes rentals, or they might be condo units owned by an association, and it can be very difficult to find an arrangement that will fit up properly so that folks who have an electric vehicle can charge at home overnight, and the property owner can still allocate their costs appropriately in terms of the cost of electricity. And frequently, in terms of our target population, it's lower income Vermonters who may be living in rental units where we want to bring the benefit of reduced transportation costs through electric vehicle ownership in programs like Patrick talked about earlier this morning. So that's what we're up to. Last year, $1 million was allocated to the pilot program, and the Department of Housing and Community Affairs is overseeing the deployment of this pilot, and Bronwyn is leading that. And so I'm going to turn it over to her unless there's any preliminary questions you have of me.
Ready yet?
Great. Hi, everyone. For the record, my name is Bronwyn Cook. I am a Community Planning and Policy Manager in the Department of Housing and Community Development. I apologize, I jumped on, I think, a few minutes late. I was coming from another meeting.
No, you're not late at all.
Okay, great. And it sounds like Michelle just teed me up pretty well here. I have about 10 minutes of information to share with you all. And of course, I'm happy to take questions as well. I'm going to start sort of at the crux of where we are right now with this program, the sort of timely information. And then I'm going to walk us back a little bit and share some details on how the program was developed and how we got to where we are with it right now. So I heard Michelle talking a little bit about this. The crux of this is that the multi-unit dwelling electric vehicle supply equipment grant program, which I apologize, we don't have a shorthand name for that just yet. But this program launched last week on Thursday, and so it's now open to affordable and nonprofit housing. There was a press release that went out on Thursday from the governor's office, and I spent a good chunk of Friday and a little bit this morning already responding to phone calls and email inquiries. So it's good to see that there's already some excitement and some interest in the program. We have a website for the program that's live. It has a very detailed program description. It has some good resources to help multi-unit property owners plan for EV charging in those property types. It has utility contacts so that they can reach out to the utility and make sure they're planning for the electrical capacity. And most importantly, it has an application. On January 26th, we'll be hosting an informational session with support from Drive Electric Vermont. And the Drive Electric Vermont team is also going to be available for providing sort of ad hoc technical support for applicants as they work through finding the right solution that works for their property. The deadline for the applications is April 1st, and we're anticipating making awards by April 22nd. Any remaining funds after that April 22nd award announcement will go into a second round of funding, and we're anticipating that we would open it up at that point to market rate multi-unit housing as being eligible for the funding as well. So that's sort of the meat and the crux of where we're at right now, this exciting and timely information. And I'm just going to take a few minutes to walk back. And I want to say a few words about working in the multi-unit housing space and fill in some details on the program that I just want to draw your attention to. So you may already know this, you probably already know this, but I just want to say a few words about multi-unit housing. It's a particularly challenging little corner of the EV charging market to be working in. And the charging solutions and the service models for this particular use case of residents charging in multi-unit housing, those solutions have sort of lagged behind some of the other charging use cases that are out there. I know we've all heard the chicken and the egg analogy before, but I think it's particularly true for multi-unit housing. It's really challenging for a property owner to think about putting EV charging in as an amenity until they see or unless they know that their residents are actually going to use it and they actually have EVs. On the flip side, it's really tough for a resident to consider going all in and buying an EV unless they know they're going to have a place to charge it when they're at home. So that's one challenge that I think particularly resonates in multi-unit housing. That's kind of tough to overcome. There's also a lot of variety in the types of multi-unit housing that's out there, the number of units that are there, the type of parking that's available. It may be dedicated parking, it might be shared parking. There may be more residents with cars than there is parking at all. So this just makes it really challenging to find the right solution. And there aren't really sort of off-the-shelf, one-size-fits-all solutions for providing charging in these types of properties. And then there's just the cost and the management. It's essentially another major appliance that's going to require some upkeep and require some repair over time. And especially for affordable housing with tight budgets and tight margins, that added expense can just be really hard to justify, especially, as I mentioned before, if you don't have residents who already own EVs and will be using it right away. So the space clearly has those are just a few examples. The space has some really tough challenges to overcome. I also just want to note, though, that it's really important to be working in this space and trying to overcome these challenges. When the majority of charging, 80 to 90% of charging, is expected to take place at home, it's really critical to identify these charging solutions for residents in multi-unit housing so that we can work towards making sure that all Vermonters have access to convenient and reliable and affordable charging at their homes. So I think this program holds a lot of promise for overcoming some of those hurdles, developing some best practices, developing some replicable models for providing charging in multi-unit dwellings. In terms of the program development, so
Senator
we,
Montgomery.
Question, yes, Senator Engel.
Has any consideration been given to when these projects are getting started? Going in there and I mean, everybody's got a parking spot in these homes and all. And has any consideration been given to the builders of these units or actually the homeowners of these units that are actually renting these properties out? Have they gone to them and said, hey, we'll subsidize this if you consider putting in electric charging? Have we approached the builders and the homeowners themselves at any level of staging when we're trying to solve this problem?
So we have, in developing the program, we did spend a fair amount of time reaching out to the owners and the managers of affordable housing units. And so we spent some time on the phone, just informally asking them, you know, what challenges have they already seen in providing EV charging? What challenges do they foresee, so that we could develop this program with that input in mind? I don't know if Michelle, if you had anything to add to that. I don't want to.
No, I think that's the gist of it, is that this is a sort of a new area, as Bronwyn mentioned. I think that affordable housing developers in particular have a lot of challenges they're trying to meet in terms of making a package work in a manner that can be market available for lower income homeowners. And so I think our efforts to bring this piece of the puzzle to the table are going to depend on a fair amount of funding and hand-holding to get them through the process.
To add to my thought on that, and a lot of these housing projects are heavily subsidized, as we know. I would think that at the beginning stages of any of these projects, I think there's a better way, and maybe we're going to get there. But I just think that why the monies are available, why we're asking for the money, the best time to do this is right at the beginning stages when we build these properties out. That's just a thought.
Okay.
Okay. So.
Berkeley.
Well, I don't know if Ms. Cook is not done. I'll let her finish, but I do have a question.
Sure. I just have just a couple more points to make about the program itself and some of, as I mentioned, some of the, I think, key elements of the design of it that I wanted to share. So I'll skip over, I think I mentioned already, but we did work on developing this program with an interagency working group, which involves staff from the Agency of Transportation, Department of Environmental Conservation, and Department of Public Service. This group met informally every week, not informally, we met weekly for 3 months to really hash out the details of this program and to spend that time reaching out to multi-unit housing providers, reaching out to affordable housing providers, reaching out to some utilities, reaching out to our regional planning commissions, and of course, Drive Electric Vermont to, again, develop this program in light of what the needs on the ground are from multi-unit housing providers. Two key things about the program that I just wanted to draw your attention to. One is that it really has been designed as a pilot program. The language in the enabling legislation characterized this as a pilot program, and the interagency working group was really diligent and intentional about avoiding an overly prescriptive program. Again, recognizing that there is no off-the-shelf, one-size-fits-all solution. We drafted the guidelines to really encourage as wide a range of charging solutions as we thought the enabling legislation would allow for. And if there was a mantra for this program, I think it would be that let the applicants tell us what would work for them. Tell us the charging solution that meets your property's needs and tell us how that proposed solution will provide that convenient, reliable, affordable charging access for your residents. We did also include some funding caps in the program design, just to, again, encourage as many different types of sites as possible, as many different types of parking situations as possible, and a variety of charging equipment. Again, just in the spirit of really piloting different solutions. The second point I wanted to make about the program guidelines, eligibility right now is limited to affordable and nonprofit housing. And again, this is a space where budgets are really tight. And so the program was designed so that most all of the costs associated with providing the EV charging would be eligible for funding. So really just trying to bring down and eliminate that cost barrier for participating and piloting solutions. So just as an example, in addition to the hardware cost, the installation cost, we're also covering the cost for what we call future proofing. So it was already mentioned that the least expensive time to put in conduit and do some of this work is when you already have the ground open. So if someone is proposing a project and they're going to be installing a level 2, then we'll also cover the cost of future proofing that equipment, installing additional conduit or additional panel capacity to expand more easily in the future when demand increases. We're also covering the cost if a proposer thinks that a networked solution will work best for them. So a networked solution is essentially just a Wi-Fi enabled station that enables credit card payment. It allows a user to be able to see on an app whether the station is in use or available at the moment. Those network stations usually have an annual subscription fee to provide that service. And so we would be covering the cost of that as well, if that's the solution that the property owner thinks will work best for their situation. And there is a 10% match requirement, just again, just a little bit of skin in the game, but that 10% match can be fulfilled through in-kind services. So an example of that, as I mentioned, these stations will require some upkeep and some maintenance. So if that is something that can be managed in-house, then that can meet the 10% match requirement. Last point I want to make, we did make the application window for this pretty long. It's about 10 weeks. We wanted to give a pretty gracious time frame for proposers to get applications together. Again, I've said it before and I'll say it one more time, the solutions in the space are not off the shelf. They've lagged behind a little bit, and we really wanted to give them time to do the legwork, to do the research, to talk to the people they need to develop a proposal that can meet their needs, that can get support from their management teams, et cetera. So that it is a bit of a longer application window. But again, just wanted to recognize that this is a new space for a lot of folks. Providing, fueling at home is not part of the typical business model or service model for providing housing. So we just wanted to recognize that and leave that application window long enough for them to really consider it and submit a good application. So that's all I had to share with you all today. Happy to answer questions.
Yes, Senator Perchlik.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Cook. I guess my question might also blend into the other program that I think that you were going to talk to us before about, just the general electric vehicle charging grant program for the public chargers. But for this program, as a pilot program, you're leaving it open to the fee schedule that the housing nonprofit or owners of the building would propose. So it could be free, if they could pay for it as the landlord, they could have it somehow metered to their unit, or you're leaving that completely open as far as this program. Is that correct?
Correct. We've asked them to provide a fair amount of detail on their fee structure that they plan on using. And we've, in the evaluation of their application, we plan to go through and evaluate and just make sure that the cost seems reasonable and it seems to be realistic. And then if they want to make any changes to their fee structure through the grant program, they would have to get approval from the interagency working group.
Okay. Can I ask you a question about the other program, the electric charging infrastructure?
You can
Because-
ask. I may or may not have the answer for you, but I will try. I've been slowly picking up some management of that program as well.
Okay. I mean, I guess unless anybody has questions on the other program, but mainly, I'm assuming you, or I know Michelle is aware of the issue around credit card payment. And I think the bill that was introduced today by Senator Parent deals with this. So I don't know if there's an update on that. And this is the issue of whether credit card readers will be required, which my understanding is earlier rounds of this program, they were required, and certain suppliers of this equipment objected to that. So I don't know if there's an update on that issue. And then I have wondered, and you had mentioned this sort of in your presentation, if one of the requirements for the public stations is that they are interconnected to the internet. Because I think a key thing for users of these stations is that they can look it up on the internet and see through whatever app that is it operational, is it full, all those things. Like if it's not connected to the grid, it's not very useful, because it's not like gas stations where you just drive by and see how many cars are there and the price is listed up on a big bulletin board. So I'm assuming that's required. So those are the two questions: the credit card question, and are they required to be, kind of not only grid connected, but available to the public apps that are out there?
Senator Mazza, if it's all right, I'll respond to the first part of Senator Perchlick's request. So at this time, we certainly are aware of Senator Parent's bill. And you may recall beginning of last April, we had a similar conversation in this committee relative to this matter. And at that time, I had testified that we would not support changing the current framework of requiring vendors who are providing these services that are funded by the public, our state, to be able to accept have a card reader or a chip reader, because in particular, folks that may be lower income, we are just introducing them to this technology. Oftentimes they might have a bank card that they've preloaded with funding, and that is their method of payment. Now, people would say, well, if the vendor provided a telephone number, they could just call in and make their payment that way, which is a reasonable thing. It's a little less convenient for the person getting the electricity charge. But I think the major obstacle we are concerned about there is the lack of ubiquitous cell coverage around the state, and the fact that there would likely be difficulty with folks even being able to use a charger. And while the range of vehicles is getting much longer in terms of how long between charges, there's still, can be uncertainty with weather, et cetera. So I think most all of the ZEV states, the zero electric vehicle emission states, have continued to have this requirement. California has this requirement. We are working on getting an update from our partners in California to determine if they are changing their thinking around this or not. And I know that there are some vendors who, have raised significant concerns, because it essentially leaves them out of the market unless they update their technology to these standards. So it's an evolving matter, and one we continue to monitor. And hopefully, as the session goes forward, I'll have more information for you about any other possibilities that we might consider.
Before we move to the other question, there's a current program, $1 million, right, for another round of grants?
Yeah. No. There's the pilot program that Bronwyn just detailed. And then we just actually issued, I think, the last RFP, and I don't know if we've made those awards yet for the $750,000 that came from the capital program.
The million is
So-
just the multifamily.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So there is no, so it's sort of kind of a non-issue because there isn't any grants program where you would have this requirement.
Well, I guess I would say that the climate action plan detailed some of the needs that we as a state know we have, and perhaps we'll have more information this afternoon on the pathway forward.
Okay, I get it. Okay. So on the interconnection, so just making sure that these places are, viewable by the internet or by PlugShare or other apps.
So in the program guidelines, we included a requirement that if the station is going to be available to the general public, then it does need to be networked so that the general public can see when it is and is not available. And also, again, because this infrastructure is meant to serve residents of the property, there may be applications where it's appropriate to open the use of that equipment during the day to the general public, but we want the management to ensure that residents aren't having to constantly compete with the public. So to be able to set limitations on when the public can access the station, you need to have a network to be able to say, no more public access, this is for residents only. If the station is intended to be just for residents, we did not require that it be networked, simply because, again, in some smaller, more sort of tightly managed situations, you might not need a network, and the network does cost money. And if you really only have one resident using it in the first year, you don't necessarily need the network. So we didn't require it for stations that would be only for residents. But again, we did ask in the application to detail for us how you plan to manage the station for resident use.
And that makes sense, but if there was to be another public grant, a public charging station grant program, would you require it to be networked for any of those grants?
I believe that to date, at least all of the grant programs that I'm aware of, if they are public stations, they are required to be networked.
So which is one of the issues of where you can put them. You need to put them where you can have internet access. And I had one other question, but I forgot what it was.
Senator Kitchell, you had a question?
No, no, I don't. What's going through my mind is I almost need an inventory of what we've done, because we have so many different strategies at work here. It's really hard. And, Senator Perchlik's question, was it $1 million here? What was it here, et cetera? I don't know if there's a sort of an inventory, but it would be helpful for us to have that, because and then what the eligibility requirements are. Maybe it's been done, but it's just impossible to keep it all straight in terms of how much do we put in Mileage Smart, and how much do we put toward this particular initiative. So that would be my only comment, is I'm really struggling to go back. And I know that we did this a year ago. Michelle referenced her testimony. Obviously, she remembers what she told us better than we remember what she told us.
Senator Chitman, you had a question?
More of a comment picking up, since I did spend some time on the topic that Senator Perchlik just raised and Michelle just responded to, which it's not, to Michelle's point, it's not even just that cell coverage isn't very great across the entire state, but there's also, we need to make these accessible to the populations that don't have a phone, that lost their phone, that had their phone stolen, that the battery died, or they're international otherwise, and they might not have access to our cell network. So that's where I came down when these discussions last spring as to why I supported what Michelle had proposed as the language that was consistent with other states.
Okay, yes. Anybody else? Senator Chitman, Senator Perchlik.
Yeah, thanks. I remembered my question. I think it's for Michelle. Do we have an update from Agency of Ag on the standards for public charging. And we got, I don't know if everybody on the committee got an email, but I know Senator Kitchell received it about somebody that had drove around to some sites about the confusion about what the different public charging sites were charging. So, and I know that was on the docket, so to speak. I know as far as the charging equipment, to make sure that when they say they sold you a kilowatt hour, you got a kilowatt hour, that's a separate thing, and about NIST. But I wondered if it was Agency of Agriculture's responsibility for their Division of Weights and Measures to deal with like signage and things like that, similar to the regulations around selling gas and other things.
Thank you, Senator Perchlik. That has been our understanding, and I know that the standard piece has been held up because of the continued development of a standard at the national level. I think I would have to speak to our partners at the Agency of Agriculture regarding whether or not they could begin to roll out the signage piece and how that would be managed so that there is clarity for folks who are charging, because there certainly is a wide array of cost structures out there. Some charging by the kilowatt hour, some charging by the time you spend there, et cetera. And then also, you can end up with overstay charges and that sort of thing, which can be significant. So I'll look into that with the Agency of Agriculture. And to respond to Senator Kitchell's request for the storybook of our progress to date, we do have that at the Agency of Transportation, and Patrick can make sure that you get the most updated version, and I'll get that to Jeannie for the committee to have copies of.
Michelle, who is it at Agency of Ag that we would talk to, or who that's working on that?
That would be Diane.
Bothfeld?
Yes, Bothfeld. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions, comments this morning? If not, thank you very much. And like I said earlier, we're learning every day. This is a long road go down, and we're picking it up as we go. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, committee, any other, why don't we go offline?